Welcome to the special virtual event with Revo Books and Boswell Book Company. It is day 4,571 of Boswell, and I don't even know if you guys are in 2, 3, 4. You're definitely not in the quadruples yet, but you'll be there. I'm gonna just tell you that it seems like you're going 1, 2, 3, and then it moves really fast. So I'm so honored to be hosting this with Revo Books, Barbara and Valeria, Cerda, and apologies, this is a very, I'm terrible pronouncing all languages. So I just want to apologize in advance for that. But in any language, I would love to introduce Barbara from Revo to say a few words and introduce.
Thank you, Daniel. Good evening, everyone. I'm Barbara Cerda, co-founder of Revo Books, and my sister, Valeria, and I opened this bookstore. We are online and traveling. We opened it in March of this year, so we're still babies. And our selection is affordable, relevant, and a reflejo of nuestra comunidad. We intentionally, carefully select new and used books for Black, Indigenous, and people of color with a specialization in Latinx literature and libros en español. We're super excited to be hosting tonight's event with Boswell Books, who's also in Milwaukee, and super excited and honored to welcome Zoraida Córdova tonight. This is Revo Books' first author event, and we truly feel that this is a really, really magical event because of the way that our bookstore came to life earlier this year. Zoraida Córdova in her writing brings magic and mayhem together, and we're all here for it. She is the acclaimed author of more than a dozen novels and short stories, including the Brooklyn Bruja series, which is also in our bookstore, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Faith, and The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina. This one. In addition to writing novels, she serves on the board of We Need Diverse Books and is the co-editor of the best-selling anthology Vampires Never Get Old, as well as the co-host of the writing podcast Deadline City. She writes romance novels as Zoe Castile. Zoraida was born in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and she calls New York City home. When she's not working, she's roaming the world in search of magical stories. So we're so excited to welcome you, Zoraida. Thank you so much for coming on and being part of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be your first author event. So
yes, we're so excited to have you. Go ahead, Valeria, take it.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to open up the floor and invite Zoraida to, I think it'd be really cool to hear just a part of the book and a piece of it, just like in your voice. I feel like an audible, it's like a mini audible. But yeah, just reading a piece so our folks listening at home can hear it.
Good. So I'm going to read a paragraph. So, I feel like nobody wants to hear me read. You read for yourselves. But so just a quick summary, the Inheritance of Orquídea Divina is about a woman named Orquídea Divina who, the day that she's gonna die, she invites her family to return to their homestead, and she's gonna give everyone an inheritance. This inheritance manifests into magical powers. 7 years later, the family begins to die one by one, and 3 of her descendants have to return to Guayaquil, Ecuador, which is where I'm from, in order to figure out why their grandmother was this way, what happened, and why their family is in danger, and just figure out but not every secret should be unearthed. So this is the invitation that Orquídea sends out. The invitation, chapter 0. You are invited to my home on May 14, the year of the hummingbird. Please begin to arrive no earlier than 1:04 p.m., as I have many matters to settle before the event. The stars have shifted. The earth has turned. The time is here. I am dying. Come and collect your inheritance. Eternally, Orquídea Divina Montoya. And so that's the invitation. And now I'm ready to talk about the book.
Thank you. I think when I first read the back of the book, when I received it, I got chills, and it also was, I feel like that invitation was like super classy. I'm like, wow, goals. One day I'll write an invitation like that. But I have like an icebreaker question that I thought would be really fun to ask you. Barbara and I were asked this question a few days ago, and I'm like, ooh, I'm asking Zoraida that. And the question is, what did your childhood smell like?
Oh, interesting. I feel like my childhood smelled like pine sol, and there's a very particular smell that white rice has, right? Like when white rice is cooking, like those two things, because every single meal that we make has a side of white rice, if not a bunch of white rice. And also sofrito, which is just like peppers, onions, garlic, olive oil sauteed. So there's like that, like every single meal. So those three things, I feel like.
Yeah, Barbara and I said similar things. She said horchata, which is like there's arroz, pero also like chiles tostados. So any chiles that that were just making us basically cough up our lungs. So yeah, similar. Well, I'll pass it to Daniel. I mean, you're the master at all these author talks. So yeah.
We do, but I feel like we were talking about how I love to have transitional, like whatever you say, I'm going to ask a question that kind of transitions. But you, first of all, you don't want to hear what my childhood smelled like, and second of all, not as good as yours. And second of all, I mean, I love your book, and I love the way that it transitions from all your other books. In terms of completely different, you're writing so many different genres, and yet there seems to be a through line in your story. And at least in this book, childhood is an important part of the story. Would you talk about like we're going to ask you about this book in particular, we promise, but talk about like your vision as a writer. Like, have you figured out? It's like some writers take their whole careers to figure out what they're saying.
Yeah. So I think, I started writing when I was 13 years old. Also, I would love it if like the attendees could tell us in the chat where they're viewing from. I'm always fascinated by that. But anyway, so when I started writing, I was 13. And I desperately wanted to write fantasy books. So I would insert myself into paranormal situations, right? A new boy comes into town and he's mysterious, right? Like Twilight. I feel like we all had that dream. And so for a long time, I think that I was trying to understand the relationship between a magical world and our real world. But now that I'm older, I feel like my love of fantasy is like a very, very deep down a metaphor for being a person who straddles two cultures, right? And so I'm Ecuadorian and I'm from New York. Like New York is a huge part of my identity. And so I think that like if I'm writing about a magical person, they also straddle like human, non-human, magical, non-magical. And I feel like it could be any kind of metaphor for that. And also people bring in their own baggage into our work. Right. So interpretation is up to the reader, and I could do my best job at saying like, this is what I intended for people to walk away from. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because everyone's going to come in with their own interpretation and read a sentence in a different way and see symbolism in a different way. And that's what my favorite part of literature is. So all of my books are really just trying to answer the question, where do I belong in the world? What is my place in it? And how am I affected by it? And how am I going to affect it in return? So I think that's what, I'm trying to say.
A way better answer than my question was. So I just.
Your question was great.
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of reflection on what you said. I think that's really deep. I think, as Chicanas or Mexican Americans, you do kind of try to figure out how to navigate these two worlds. And now that you say it, I think it makes me, I feel a lot more connected to the book, and like the way that you explain, working between magical and non-magical. It makes a lot of sense now. And I think one way I connected to the book was I work in like social justice realm outside of book selling, but it's like you're selling the work that you do is like also kind of selling a dream, and you're talking about a world that doesn't exist yet. And I think books like this one offer a lot of hope because you're able to like expand your imagination. And so I guess I maybe wanted to ask you, like, where does your imagination come from? Like what does your magical world look like? Where does that all come from?
I mean, I was born in Ecuador, but we in Guayaquil, and then we immigrated to Queens, New York. And so
I'm from Queens.
Yes. So Queens is just such a incredible place because it has so many different neighborhoods. It has the most languages spoken in like a very specific region. And, growing up, my world just had a little bit of everybody in it. And I feel like that kind of stuff, really creates empathy, right? And so I don't know, I feel like place is something that I'm always really, really attracted to as a concept, because you can't escape it, you can't escape it. And so I hope that everyone can walk into my book and give it a chance the way that, I do to so many books out there. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry. I feel like I always go off in tangents.
No, you're all good. I think either direction we get a lot out of it. And it seems like we got Ecuador is in the house. Lucia
Yes.
is in, one of our viewers is also from Ecuador. Shout out to Lucia. But Lucia also asks, do you have any influence from the art era of magic realism?
Yes and no. I feel like most of my influence is fantasy novels that are just straight, mermaids, vampires, elves, all that stuff. That's my first influence. As I got older, of course, stealing books from my grandmother's shelves. My grandmother loves Isabel Allende. I got to meet Isabel Allende because we have the same publisher, which is like so incredible to me. And I still can't believe that. And so she commented on how long my nails were. And she's like, how do you get anything done? Your nails are so long. Which I love her. I love her for that. Because it's real. And so I read those books later on in life, and I think they're beautiful books. But I think my primary influence comes from fantasy and wanting to escape the world, right? Mm-hmm. Queens is great, but that's what I wanted to say. Sorry. I eventually go back to my point, but I always want an escape. And I think that no matter how much you love the place that you live, sometimes you just want to escape into something else. Mm-hmm. And that could be escaping into a Star Wars novel, which I have written for, or you escape into Narnia, or, mm-hmm. nobody wants to escape into the Hunger Games, right? So, but there are other places we can go to.
That's rough.
If I may, I can see, you've been compared a lot to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, so you're getting a lot of magical realism love, and I love magical realism. But one thing that's, you can see the fantasy element is you're so good at world building, and it's anyway. I mean, some places real, some places not. But like I love the section set in Guayaquil. It's like, when am I going? Like, start looking at flights. It's such a celebration of Ecuador. And I just want to say, is this a question? Was that on purpose?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is on purpose and it's not on purpose. As growing up, all of the books by Latino writers that I was given were generally either Mexican, Puerto Rican, or Dominican. And so I feel like I have a very good understanding of these cultures because of all the books that I was given as a kid. Or it was like, I was also given a lot of Irish. I was obsessed with like Irish history for a period of time because I really loved Frank McCourt and like Angela's Ashes, and my mom loved that movie. And so like I was just like, I just went down this like Irish spiral. And I love it. And I eventually went to Ireland and I was like, wow, this is definitely not like Angela's Ashes. Great. But if you think about it, right, if books create empathy, then we're reading about a group of people. And so if Ecuador is a very small country, we are very humble and small and beautiful. But like, if this is the only time somebody's going to read about Ecuador, I felt like I have to do a good job. Like, what if I'm the only Ecuadorian somebody ever meets, right? And they think I'm mean, right? So I feel like there's just too much pressure of being the only story. And I think that's why I would love to see more Ecuadorian authors have more books. I mean, we need more books in the world. Like, people are always reading. I'm hopefully going to be reading and writing until the day I die. So that's why it was important for me to show all of the beautiful parts of Ecuador, because I feel like sometimes in the news you only see the worst of a place. I feel like that happens to us in America. Like the world sees us a certain way, and I'm like, but we have such great stuff too. And so it's a balance of showing both. Like, yeah, there is like a lot of pain and all of this stuff, but there's also a lot of beauty in places. And so as a writer, to me, I feel not the burden is not the right word, but I feel like I'm entrusted with the history of my people in case this is the only time somebody's going to read about my people.
And I think that's the reason why I feel like because it's centered like in about Ecuador, I feel like it does a lot for the culture, right? I think it connects like Latinos more together, so to speak, because Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we're at, it's primarily Mexicano. And so I think there's like this, I mean, it's nice that people can find like their home, Mexico, in a different country, but also we have a lot of other people from El Salvador, de Guatemala, that need to find their also home in other places. And if it's like through an author, I think that's really beautiful, because we did an event centered around El Salvador, and even finding authors that were about El Salvador was really, really difficult. And to be able to like provide a book and an author that's from El Salvador, que is from Ecuador, I think it does a lot for people. So yeah, that wasn't even a question, it was a statement.
Thank you.
We were talking about this with Daniel, like, all right, people mostly have sometimes statements, but that's okay.
I was like, I don't know if I've asked a question yet, but
There is a question here from Yuseli. You shared that you started writing at the age of 13. Was it always this magical? And then it's kind of like a 2-3-part question.
Okay, I can see it here.
Yes. When writing, did you look for a mentor? Or what or who were your I look up to this person people?
Well, so I started writing when I was 13 because I read a book, it was extra credit. I read a book by a writer named Amelia Atwater Rhodes, and she was 13 years old when she got her first book deal from Delacorte Random House, right? So that was a big deal. And her book was about vampires. And I was like, oh, I love vampires. I love magic. I'm 13. I could be a writer. And we're two different people. She's white and from Massachusetts, and I'm Ecuadorian from Queens. And we had two different experiences, but we were both teenage girls and we both loved writing. And so just seeing even like the tiniest mirror where I could see like a small part of myself reflected really gave me almost like permission, like that this was a career path, right? Like if like, I guess if I had seen it, maybe if I had seen like a lady astronaut, I would have been like, I could be an astronaut too, right? But space terrifies me, so no, I should not be an astronaut. Instead, I became a writer, thankfully, where I could write about space. And so I didn't have a mentor, but I had a teacher named Mr. Johnston, and Mr. Johnson was a character, and I have a separate story about him. But he signed me up. He sent in an application for me for the National Book Foundation writing camp in Vermont. And so I got accepted. And so when I was 16, I got to go to a writing camp with like authors like Jacqueline Woodson and Kamiko Han and all of these like celebrated fancy writers. And so there were a lot of people there. I had almost like a crash course MFA in 10 days. And I got to go for 2 years, 2 summers, 10 days, Vermont. I think it was Bennington or Binghamton or one of them. And so that was more than any mentorship that could have afforded me. It really taught me about how to critique without hurting people's feelings. I think that like sometimes if you're in the wrong critique group, it could really ruin your self-confidence. But because these teachers, they were like, we critique to help you get better, not to like make you feel bad for what you've already written. And so that really, learning that at such a young age really, really helped me understand how to be a writer and how to be a writer in community. And then a few years now, I'm 34 now, but when I was a few years ago, maybe like 5 years ago, I was riding the train and I was going home to visit my family in Queens. And I just happened to like get into this one car that was open. And I look up and across from me is Mr. Johnson, my high school social studies teacher of African American studies. And he's wearing the Ecuador hat that I gave him when he's still wearing it like 10, 15 years later. And so it was just really nice to see him. And he told me that he was following my career. So yeah, that's just a great side note.
That's so wholesome. Oh my God.
I know, my heart.
I know, like, oh.
I'm like, it's crying time. I can feel like the look in my throat. I'm like, I cry about everything, so I'm ready to cry.
I cry at commercials, so.
I would love to discuss in terms of the book, the inheritance of Orquídea Divina. What a juggling act you put together. You have a family coming together, and we follow 3 sort of grandkids who are going to try to unlock the secret of why they've been called together, why the the relatives have started dying, what's in their past. You decided to do a story. You started to do two timelines because we're following the past, we're following the present, multiple characters. I would say, could you have made this any more complicated? Except that it so flows. Like the only thing I would say about, I love multiple perspectives and I love multiple timelines, and I thought you did a great job of pulling it, like me wanting to get to each one. Like, so I was never upset because I was like, I wanted to know what was happening here too. But how did you put this all together? Like, I know it started with a short story.
Yes.
From one of the characters from Miramar. And then how did you turn this? Like, how did you write this? Were you writing character at a time, a timeline at a time? Was this, what do we call it? We call it pantsing versus planning. Like, did you just say, I'm going to see how it goes? What was going on?
Writing this book was a journey for sure. Usually I am a plotter. I plot my books very detailed. This one was a little different because I almost didn't know it. I didn't know what to say. And Danielle is right. It started as a short story for an anthology called Toil and Trouble. It was tales about women and witchcraft. And so I wanted to create this mythology of this woman who transformed into a tree. And during transformation, her family comes back to the family. And so when it became time to make it into a book, it needed to change a little bit because I needed to understand who was this woman, why is she like this, what hurt her, and why is she doing this? Because I feel like the transformation is like in order to protect herself and her family. And so I needed to answer all these questions. So it was a process of zooming out. And like it's sort of like watching a movie and like you see like a character and then you keep zooming out and then you see where they're sitting and then you zoom out again and you see their home and you zoom out again and you see the land around the home. And so as I kept doing that, I kept understanding more about the characters. This book was incredibly different from the rest of my books because I didn't have a detailed plan. And so every time I edited the book, I had a new plan. I had to make a new plan almost, right? Because my editor should really take the credit for alternating between the different characters, because originally I was going to try to tell the story only from Marimar's point of view. But if I did that, we wouldn't be able to see what everyone else is feeling and thinking and doing. And so once I put Ray's point of view and Rhiannon and her mom's point of view, then it finally felt like it clicked. And so that's something that you could only really get during the revision process. And so, you know, one of my teachers told me, you have to write it wrong before you can write it right. And I didn't used to really believe her because I'm stubborn and I want to do everything right the first time. But this book is a very clear example of like, you have to write it wrong and then fix it. And so it's funny because like I did a talk with one of my editors from my Spanish publisher. And I asked her, because I speak Spanish fluently, but I couldn't translate plotter and pantser, right? So when you're a plotter as a writer, you plot your book and you outline, and a pantser, you write by the seat of your pants. And so I was like, what's the translation? How do you say that in Spanish? And she says, we don't say that in Spanish. We say compass writer, that you're either a map writer or a compass writer. So a map writer, you have an outline, and a compass writer, you're sort of just walking around with like a compass and trying to figure your way out. And I was like, that's so much more poetic. Everything sounds better in Spanish than pantser. So I feel like that's what I feel like I did. I had a compass, which makes sense, right? Like the stars in the book are compass roses.
And you talked a little bit about this of the process, but at the end of the book, you said something like, you talked about the chaotic process that you have sometimes, and I was like, ooh, say more. Like what does this process look like?
I feel like I'm very self-destructive. When I sit down to write, I procrastinate. It's an anxiety, like anxiety makes me procrastinate because I'm afraid of starting in the wrong place. I'm afraid of doing things wrong. And I know that I should just start. And The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina is my 17th published novel. And I feel like every book has been written in sort of a state of panic, right? I turned in this book 2 years late almost. And my publisher was very, very patient with me. My editor should be canonized as a saint for being so patient with me. And so the chaos really lies in how much stuff I have with me at all times. I'm trying to see if I don't have anything on me that I can show to prove, but I usually have these, they're kind of like, I think what architects use, they're these like sketch pads that are graphs, graph paper. So I have the book outlined on several sheets of those. I tape them to the wall. I have 70 billion post-its that I lose all the time, but I'll get an idea, write it on a post-it and post it on my computer. And so if you could see the outline of my computer, it's just covered in post-its. The anxiety of writing a story for me is that I have to rewrite the outline every time I change it. So I have just several. Look, the answer is to turn everything digital, but I can't do that. I need the paper, right? I need the texture of the words on a piece of paper. And when I went to Oxford, Mississippi, and I went to the Faulkner Museum, and so it was really, I forget, I don't know what book he was writing, but when you go into Faulkner's house, on a wall, there's an outline of him writing on a wall, the outline of his book. And I remember which book it was, like Sound and Fury or whatever, as I lay dying. I'm not sure, but imagine having to write your outline on a wall and then your spouse just comes in and has to like keep painting over it because you need a fresh thing. And I'm like, Faulkner needed Post-its. And so I felt like that. Like I felt like I related to that process where you're so spun out that you just resort to writing on the walls because it's just a clearer space.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I totally feel all of this that you're saying, because I feel like maybe sometimes Valeria is frustrated with me because of the way that I operate, but yeah.
Put it on a Google Doc.
Yeah, she's just like,
Farmer's a Post-it.
No.
Wow, and I just need an ear. So yeah.
It's not real until I write it down.
Right.
By hand.
Right. So I have a question. First of all, I'm not done reading the book. I have just hit part 2. The house is on fire. And La Abuelita is dying. So a lot of like our people, our community knows that Valeria and I lost both of our grandmothers early this year. And that is why I said earlier that it was like pretty magical because, our grandmothers passed away and then, our house is on fire. Like it's mayhem. We're dreaming up this bookstore. We are registering and doing all of these things to get this bookstore in order. But like, what was that? I want to know, like, what was that like writing a story about, or writing, the part of where La Abuelita is like dying and essentially dead now?
Well, it's not a spoiler since it's part of the premise of the book. it was actually really brutal because my grandmother is still with me, thank goodness. And the book is partially based on her. She obviously did not transform into a magical tree, but I feel like a lot of the struggle of, you know, being a single mom and just being on the fringes of society somehow, that really went into Orquídea's character. But writing it was really brutal for me because I kept thinking like, well, this moment is, I didn't want it to be tragic and sad. I wanted to feel like a fairy tale. I wanted it to feel like magic, but I just kept thinking about like my own grandmother. And so that made it like a very start and stop situation for me, because I kept having to stop and like and force myself to like say like, this is just a character. But you know, you grow attached to these people in so many ways, and so that, you know, that impacts me a lot. When I know that I'm in it when I cry over a character. And so
So I got that feeling. Like I also didn't, like I'm reading it and I didn't feel like triggered. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like it was like kind of like a beautiful thing. And then Valeria also, you know, kind of pointed out is that like it's like you still have a relationship with someone even after they pass. And I didn't think of that way. Like I haven't thought of that like that. And so I guess this is like my second question. Sorry that I'm taking up kind of a lot of space here, but yeah. So what is that like where did that come from? Is like kind of like still having like a relationship with someone like after they pass? Like did your like family shape that like kind of understanding of like death, or is that just like something?
No, I think that I haven't had a lot of, you know, immediate family die in my family. I have, you know, I've gone back to Ecuador for funerals and things like that. So the funeral scene in the book that takes place in Guayaquil, that I was just remembering like the last funeral I went to in Ecuador, and in that cemetery, which if you Google pictures of that cemetery that's mentioned in the book, that's exactly what it looks like. So you can actually Google places from the book, from the Guayaquil scenes, and you can't Google Four Rivers because I'm never going to tell anybody where that place is. What state that this and the valleys in. But wait, can you repeat the first part of your question? It was my tangent again.
I think it was like, what is your relationship with death? Almost
The relationship with death.
I didn't say
right,
those
yes.
words, but
so it wasn't my family. It wasn't my family because we haven't had like immediate people die. But I think about it all the time because I'm morbid. My favorite character in popular culture is Wednesday Addams. And so and then Lydia Deeds, right, from Beetlejuice. So I feel like I think about this all the time because I always wonder, do the people that we love sort of think about us after they're gone? And what do we do? Like, what do we actually leave behind when we pass away, right? What is the legacy that we leave behind? Is it like fighting on Twitter? Is it I made someone's life better? I helped my neighbor, I helped my family. Like, what is our actual legacies? And so I think that I write a lot about death because I'm also trying to answer, along with a ton of questions. But I'll finish this answer first. I'm trying to answer, like, what are we leaving behind for the better and for the worse, right? For better or worse, like, what are we leaving behind? And we can't actually talk to the people that are gone. And so in this book, it was just my opportunity to actually have a conversation, right? Like I would love to ask my dad's mom did pass away a few years ago. And I'm like, there's so many things I never got to ask her, right? Her family immigrated to Ecuador from Spain and Italy. And so I'm like, what must that have been like? What must that have been like for her to live in the Ecuadorian countryside in like the 40s and 50s from immigrant parents, right? From a different generation that immigrated. And so I wish I had known, and I wish I had been able to ask her, and I can't. And so here in this book, it's sort of like wish fulfillment, right? Like they can literally talk to their grandmother's bones in a scene. And we don't all get to do that. So. Mhm.
It definitely feels like death, and this probably carries through from some of your other books too, is more of a transformation than an end.
Yeah. So it's the transformation for sure. So I really love, I hope that we can all think about that in all ways.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like that part of the book for me, I was like, wow, this is fantasy. This is also self-help. I'm like, wow, I'm really going through something right now. Who am I?
You've talked sometimes, and I listened to your watched your event with your editor, your second, Melanie Iglesias Paris. It was really great, and you talked a little about some of your favorite characters, some things like this is always a sad thing about books is that most people write more than they can that winds up in the finished book. Will you talk a little about some of your favorite characters and some of the people that maybe I always say to people when you cut, like maybe you can give us a little a short story or a little something later, bring it back and something. Would you talk a little about that?
Yes. So I didn't cut a lot from this book, but I added a lot to this book. I feel like in some ways I was learning about the characters as I was writing, which doesn't always happen for me. I usually start knowing pretty solidly like who they are, what they love, what they don't love, why they're here in the first place. Why am I telling the story? And so this was the first time that I had that exploratory bone in this world. And a lot of that is thanks to my editor. And I feel like, I remember in college in my English literature classes, a lot of the teachers always talked about the importance of editors. And that is really, I take that to heart because this is one of the best editorial relationships that I've had. And I feel like it shows in the way that people are reading my book. And so Melanie really, really sort of like, it's like having somebody guide you through a forest while you're wearing a blindfold, and she's like, they're guiding you out, but they're not doing the work for you. They're just like making sure you find safety. And that's what our process was like. Although sometimes I was like, please hold my hand.
I think I read into that a little because I felt like there's a lot of backstory built into a lot of your characters. And it was like, I think Raimondo could have his own novel. I was just like.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? I think that you're given the information that I need you to know, right? Like, right. I don't want to give you more than you actually need to know for this book. But I'm glad that you think Ray could have his own book.
I think he could have his own book and also feel like this book could be a movie. I'm like, someone has to do it. Someone make a movie right now.
So. We're trying. Fine. I'm in LA. I'm knocking on Hollywood's door and I'm like, hey, please take this book. Tessa says here that her mom always refers to a person transitioning rather than passing or dying. And I think that's really beautiful.
Let's see, we do have one question hanging out, which is from Christine, and she asks, will you please speak to your use of symbolism, or at least I perceived it as symbolism, in the use of hummingbirds, dragonflies, fish, and other natural items?
Yes, there's a lot. So the symbolism between, specifically with nature, is sort of, I like to think of, you know, the transition between life and afterlife is like a return to nature, right? We return, and so in Ecuador, but specifically the things that have followed Orquídea to this valley are hummingbirds and flowers and things like that. And so in Ecuador, there's an abundance of species of hummingbirds and orchids and roses. And sometimes when you buy a bouquet of roses, you should ask where they're from, because sometimes they come from Ecuador, sometimes they come from Colombia, but oftentimes they are imported from Latin America. My publisher sent me flowers the other day, and on the sticker it says from Colombia. So I thought that was really cool. But because there are so many species of hummingbirds, and in all the different, from the mountains to the jungle to the rainforest to the coast, there's just hummingbirds all over in Ecuador. I walked out of the airport and there were hummingbirds near the flowers, and just like, you know, for when Marimar arrives to Ecuador. And so that the symbolism is that these things have sort of followed her, to Four Rivers, where she's made her new home. And the insects, specifically like dragonflies and all of the things that are in the valley, specifically the fish, all of that is sort of like, they're protecting her. The valley itself is Orquídea's retreat from the world because of the things that she has suffered and the people who have hurt her. And so here, nature keeps her safe, if people can't keep her safe. And so that's the symbolism of them, is protection.
Would you talk a little about one other thing that's sort of important in the book that seems to have a literary history about itself is circuses? Would you talk? I mean, I was thinking about some. I mean, the circus is on the decline for probably good reason, or transforming. But it's an important part of your book. And were you inspired by real, by historical, by Ecuadorian, by literary circuses? And how does do you feel like it, does it symbolically connect to the story? I mean, it's very important. We can't give it away. So
no, we can't give it away.
We can talk about, if you love circuses, then read this book, but we can't tell you why.
So Daniel, you make an excellent point. I think that the thing about this book is it was written through many years. And so I feel like I was a different person every year, right? Like new haircut, who this, right? And I've been fascinated with circuses forever because in New York, in Brooklyn, there's Coney Island, and Coney Island has a huge history of circuses and sideshows specifically. I think that the macabre nature of sideshows and quote unquote freak shows is that you're putting people on display like animals at a zoo, right? And so, and it's not always because they're actually magical, it's because some people have a disability that they're treating like something that they can put on display, right? Like in the book, there's a seal boy, and is he actually a seal, or does he have a disability? And I think that there was a period of time, and probably still today, where these sideshows and these circuses exploited people. And, you know, it wasn't all Hugh Jackman's Barnum and Bailey remake, right? It wasn't singing and dancing and everyone's happy and we're a big family. Sometimes it was like exploitation. There were actually some circuses that would just have a person from a non-white, non-European background, and they would just be in a pen, and it was like, look at this marvel. And so that was really, it's really cruel. Like, it's cruelty to somebody, right? To have them like poked and prodded and looked at. But that's just sort of like a part of humanity that existed. And so without spoilers, Orquídea ends up in one of these places, and I do, you know, romanticize it a little bit, but because I wanted to have this like idea of a magical circus. But the truth of it is, like, I've always just been fascinated by like the things that we're capable of as people. And so it also harkens back to my very first novel, which took place in Coney Island. And that also had an aspect of like the marvelous and macabre and things like that.
I think back to, if there was a time when this book Geek Love was a cult classic, and in that book the parents like disfigure their children to make them circus acts. It's still pretty powerful, but it's probably, I don't have anything to say about that beyond that, but that's fascinating. What's your next question, Valeria? Do you have one? Or does Barbara have a question?
I have one that might take a different direction, but
oh no, you can move away. You can take a right turn. You can get on the Grand Central Parkway and head to another part of this
just
book.
take your compass. Just take your compass with you.
We're just gonna go this way. I really want to know, I guess, what it's like being like Latina in the writing industry.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think there's a lot of, you know, we have a lot of friends and a lot of us who are in industries that are obviously really difficult to be in because they're male dominated, they're white man dominated. And so I guess, like, what is that like?
I mean, I feel very blessed with this experience because my publisher Atria is a division of Simon and Schuster, and they do have, you know, my editor is Puerto Rican and my publicity and marketing team are both women of color. And so I think that they really understood the book. And my publisher is white and she also understands the book. So I think that, like, you know, I think one of the things that I really strive for is just like books should bring us together, right? And because we go into them wanting to learn and have empathy and like look at characters and just look at how somebody's life is portrayed in a novel. But I feel like I've also been struggling for a decade, right? Like, next year is going to be a decade. So it's only 9 years right now. But my first novel published in 2012, and at that time, the first novel that I did try to get published was rejected for very weird reasons, right? And publishers, they say a lot of things that could be considered microaggressions. But I just kept writing because I'm like, what am I going to do? Be sad that a publisher told me that they already had a Latina author, as if like you can only have one author at a time, right? Like, I can't let that stuff get to me. You have to just keep writing until you find the right place. And so now when I first started, there were not a lot of Latina writers that were writing fantasy in traditional publishing, but now there are so many. I have an anthology coming out in, what year are we in? In February 2022, and it's called Reclaim the Stars, and it's 17 stories about fantasy and space sci-fi, and it's all Latino authors, Latinx authors. And so now I've like, we found so many, and it's taken 9 years. But you know, if publishing is a table, right, like the Knights of the Round Table, it's only getting bigger, right? And we just have to make the table bigger. And if there's no room for us, we sit in another table. And we just keep writing, because I think that like there's nothing wrong with there being more stories, right? We're not asking people to stop writing stories. We're asking people to just like let us publish more stories. So that's really where I am. I have a great community of a lot of different kinds of people, and I think that is just stronger that way.
Valeria, you also wanted more. I mean, this was kind of your second part, which is words of inspiration for folks.
Yeah.
Oh,
like-
I think that people want advice from me. I'm a disaster.
Yes, you do.
I think that writing the book, the most honest book that you can write, is a very good start. You have to, for me, it's important to figure out what you want to say. It's taken me a decade to figure out what I want to say as an author. And some people arrive at that much sooner. But for me, definitely, it has been like a learning experience of who I am as a storyteller, who I want to be as a storyteller in the future. And so, but you won't know unless you actually write it. So you have to write the book, right? Like finish the book first. And then everything else, all of the information is out there. If at 17 years old, I send out my first query letter, and I found the Writer's Digest book at the about authors and about agents and editors at the library, like that's all I needed. Like all of the information is out there, but you have to write your book first. And you have to be honest with yourself and your characters. And so that's really how you keep going. And you also have to read a lot. And I one time somebody got so mad on the internet because I said authors need to read books. And I'm like, I don't understand why that's controversial, but you need to read books, because I feel like you have to read all kinds of books, nonfiction, fiction. I'm not saying read 100 books a year. I'm saying like read at least one book a month, one book in the whole year. Just read one book, because that tells you, you learn about how you want to write. Like even if that one book, you're like, I don't like that book, you at least know that you don't want to write like that book. And so if you were a scientist, you would be up to date with all new kinds of technology and theories that are being worked on at the moment. And so as writers, you want to know what's happening out there, what happened in the past, what's happening now. And I think that just like, it's just part of like the business. You know, I read as many fantasy authors as I can, because I want to know what people are doing.
Yeah.
And so it's, that's just how I think of that.
Are you reading anything
Drop some
right
names.
now?
Who are your faves?
Oh,
We had the same question.
For my
yeah.
So I love this author. So I love Tessa Gratton, who has a novel called The Queens of Innisleer. And she has a lot of fantasy novels. They're very thick. They're heavy fantasies. And she is a phenomenal writer. There's Kate Elliott, if you like science fiction and fantasy. If you like sci-fi, Kate Elliott, she has a series called Unconquerable Sun. And it's basically Alexander the Great in space, like sort of like that. For more contemporary stuff, if you love romance, Alexis Daria has a new romance called A Lot Like Adios. And it's about two best friends who fell out And now that they're adults and older, they still have a lot of chemistry, and they sort of reunite and fall back into love. It's very spicy too. So if you like romance, that's a good one. What else am I loving? The Inheritance. Sorry, that's my bad. The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by Victoria Schwab. And so the Addie Larue is about a woman who makes a deal with the devil to live forever. And the only catch is that nobody will ever remember her. And so 400 years later, she's sort of going through life and nobody remembers her, you know, and except one day she's at a bookstore and this guy remembers her. And so it's sort of about why that is. We see her in the past, like 400 years, throughout 400 years. It's a really beautiful book.
I think I have a lot of reading to do.
Oh, one more. If you like a little tiny bit of magic, there's a Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. And Ninth House is basically like if the Yale secret societies were actually magical cults at Yale. And so it's about this girl who's an outsider and she can see ghosts. And that's really important for these societies for a very specific reason. And even though she's like a college dropout, she gets like this full ride to Yale to be part of this secret society called Ninth House. And it's great. It's a phenomenal book. I love it so much.
Those have been big, both Ninth House and Victoria Schwab's books have been very popular with our booksellers as well. We could talk to you for like 6 more hours. I was like, oh, I thought of all these questions.
It's dinner time. It's dinner time,
yeah,
guys.
But I think we have to wrap it up. But I'm going to leave it to Valeria. Do you have a last question? Do you think?
I don't, but I do just want to say before we end that I guess, like, of course, thank you, for joining us and sharing a lot, but also for shaping a lot of what that fantasy world is looking like now, and I guess making the table a lot bigger for other Latinas who want to write, and for I guess just making us feel at home through your book and also through speaking with you. I think there's a big lump in my throat and there's a big lump in Barbara's throat. I know that. So so I guess thank you for bringing that like real element of home. I think it's really special that you're our first author discussion because the way that you're connected to your roots and how I guess like how family based the story is, it made us really feel at home. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I hope that everyone watching can pick up the book, and if you already picked up the book, that you read it. So thank you so much for watching us today.
Yeah, we're on it. We're getting that book out there. But yeah, thank you. Like Valeria said, thank you for coming on and making us feel like home. Thank you to Daniel for thinking of us and inviting us to co-host with you. And of course, thank you to our people who are watching and sending us Instagram screenshots and things like that. Ellas Cafe is out here. Lilia, I think Figueroa is on here. Lucia, of course, all of our people, and we love you all.
And if you want like bookmarks and stuff, you should hit up my publicist. I think she still has some.
We
will do
and
that. We'll get them both.
Yay. And I also want to plug and also share. Barbara has an alternative and cool program that she runs called Barbie the Book Fairy. She makes sure to get books out to the little libraries in our neighborhood on the south side of Milwaukee. She actually has a subscription box that she actually just sold out from, but maybe by popular demand we'll have more. So for folks on here, check it out and check out Barbie the Book Fairy as well. She's also very magical and does really dope things for the community. And for everyone else, we have an event tomorrow called Hollow Reads. Take home a calabacita. We're going to be carving stuff. There'll be some bonfires, and we're offering free cafe for everyone to roll through, bring a book, and just come read outside with us and do fall stuff.
That sounds amazing. Have a good time. I wish I was there.